Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Game On, a podcast brought to you by Bayhackle Sports. And, of course, we have two sponsors, 988lifeline.org. Make sure you text, call, 988 24/7, 365 days a year. It's all about mental health. Make sure you stay healthy. Christmas time, hey, everybody's a little healthy right now, at least for the holiday season. And then also we have North Carolina Medicaid. They're on board also, so thank them for their sponsorship and all they do for high school sports and backing what we do. So, Jack, as usual, tell everybody what they can do to help us out.
So, of course, if you want to make sure you can hear everything we have to say, you get these updates.
If you want to.
These episodes as quickly as possible. Of course, you can go on to anywhere you get your podcasts, whether you listen to them, watch them, like, comment, and subscribe, going over to our website as well. Anywhere that you can get access to Bayhackle Sports content, we would absolutely appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, so high school football playoffs. Round one's done, off to round two.
Yeah, got through the big gauntlet.
Got through that. And then just real quick, before we go into the second round matchups, I think kind of the one team that surprised me week one was Marvin Ridge.
Yeah.
I mean, taking care of Asheville, going to Asheville. You're talking, what, a 26 seed and a 7 seed?
Yeah, that's a huge game. Huge upset.
Yeah, I think that one kind of threw everybody for a loop a little bit.
Yeah, there was very few upsets. If you go down, the list, you found very, very rare that that happened. I think the other one you saw maybe like West Rowan beating Freedom in the 2A, but very rarely anywhere around this year did you see any big kind of upset like that. So that was pretty huge, and it just shows how intense that conference is,
right?
And how just no matter what going on around the conference or outside of the conference, the competition they play within that conference, it sets them up for taking on big teams in the postseason, and that's what kind of goes through. You also look at a game like Maiden and Lincolnton. That was another big one.
Right.
Those teams have played second time in 3 weeks. Lincolnton got the better of the matchup first time around, and then Maiden got revenge in the second matchup between the two. So big win for Maiden as well. Of course, now they're incurring the wrath of having to go to Shelby next week. So
enjoy that one.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough trip for them, but they've already got one under the belt.
Yeah. And, I looked at I go back and look at some of the first round games too, some of the ones that, kudos to Porter Ridge.
Yeah.
To go to Charlotte Catholic and, you lost by 3.
Yeah.
I mean, you were at that game.
Yeah, they hung on to the very very end there. It's just a matter of it's not scoring quick enough. It was a tight first half coming. It was only a one touchdown game coming out of the first half.
Right.
Tie ball game at one point. And it's hard when you get Catholic the way they run the ball.
Right.
It's hard. The attrition will set in towards the end of the game, and it's hard to defend.
Because they just pound.
That's
they
all
pound
they do.
and pound and pound. And
Yep.
And one other one before we move on to and Butler.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you lost by 3 to the 3 seed.
Yeah.
In East Forsyth. So, if you're Butler, I mean, first year head coach, trying to, fill the shoes of the legend Brian Hales. I mean, not a bad way.
No, not at all. I mean, they were, they were probably not happy to get in the playoffs, but they were,
used to it. Yeah.
They were certainly lucky to get in, with the way that their season started out. There was very few conferences that got, 3 teams in. So,
right.
you had Catholic, you had, especially in the 4A. So, they were definitely, and it shows again that's Butler football.
Well, and it shows what that Southwestern 4A conference is all about in terms of, you got to run the gauntlet there.
Absolutely.
Because even the lower tier of that conference, none of it's easy.
No.
I mean, when you got to still play Indy and you still got to play Catholic and you still got to play Butler, I mean, that's pretty stout. All right, so on we go to week 2.
Yeah. Got some big matchups.
What if you had to pick one maybe most excited about? What are you thinking?
I mean, it's hard to not pick.
Go ahead.
It's hard to not pick Huff and Independence.
Which, real quick, is our game of the week for
As it
Bayhackle
should
Sports. Yeah, we'll be live streaming that game Friday, starting at 7:00, and it's a no-brainer which one you stream there.
2 high-powered offenses, but also 2 teams that very much so focus on their defensive abilities to shut down teams and to make it a tough team to play. So it's going to be really a matter. It's going to be whoever's defense is better, to be honest. I mean, these offenses fly on all cylinders,
right?
And so it's hard pressed to find a way to stop either one of them. And you have 2 of the more dynamic and successful coaches in terms of their tenure that they've been here. Deshaun Baker coming back to Huff and continuing that program, and then
right.
and as well as DJ McFadden with what he's done with Indy over the last 4 years. It just really brings up the question. Like last year, their seeding being at the 22, it hurt them in terms of, not really getting any home games throughout the season. But with the route that they had taken, they didn't have to play any teams in our area
Right.
up until,
The end,
up until
pretty
the
much,
end with
right?
Butler
The
and
semi?
Weddington.
Right, yeah,
with
the
Butler and
quarters and
Weddington.
semis, yeah.
But now with getting that 21 seed, and that's where you just get questions about, like, and nothing against some of these teams, but like Mallard Creek getting to host when they were second in the conference, Sun Valley getting to host when they were second in the conference.
Right.
It really just questions, how much that RPI affects it, to where now they have to go to Huff, and that's it. I couldn't
That's
tell
a
you
gauntlet.
that. Yeah,
I
I
mean,
couldn't
that-
tell you how the game turns out.
Well, I just, how much, gosh, I've read some of the stuff that DJ's put out on social and stuff like that, because he tells it like it is.
Oh yeah.
He's got a chip on his shoulder. He's
He
ready.
does.
He's ready to be like, and I mean, I get it to a point, like you just said. I mean, really, another bottom half of the tier.
What more do they have to do?
Right, exactly. I mean, and that conference, we just mentioned it, the Southwestern 4A playing in that and doing what they did. Yeah, I mean, I get it, and I don't know. It
really.
and I think the path we've talked about last week, the path they took last year,
Mm-hmm.
I think has prepared them well for this year.
See, I don't even know if it's
Or do you even talk about it?
I
I
mean-
mean, look at what what I'm getting at though. They had to run this gauntlet last year, but not game 2 wasn't against Huff.
But I mean, they did have to go on the road, to Watauga. They did have to go, take on
Right.
these big teams.
Right.
I think this year, just their strength of schedule for their, the beginning of the season, their non-conference games, I think really hurt them. Myers Park, kind
Which
of
you thought would have been
but then kind of falling
right.
down.
Right.
Then you wonder and question how much having a game against West Charlotte would
Would have helped.
and so with that game not going on, you play Hickory Ridge, they don't win a game, so
Right.
that's nothing for you. Charlotte Christian obviously had a great strength of schedule, and but I don't know how they factor in private schools into their RPI,
Right.
and then South Mech as well. You didn't think that South Mech was going to be,
Drop off the way they did.
Yeah, so-
yeah, I get it.
and then it's just your the rest of your conference, which big wins against Providence and Butler, are definitely enough to help you. But the loss over to Catholic
Right.
was just crushing for them. But I think that if there's anybody, I'll say this: if there's anybody that could go into Huff and beat them in our area, it's Independence. We thought it was Mallard.
Agreed.
We thought it was Mallard Creek. We saw how they handled Mallard Creek. I don't think that outside of maybe Weddington.
Right.
I don't think that there's another team outside of the area, and I'll say that even to Catholic. I'll say that even to some of the other, like to Mooresville. I really don't think there's another team out there besides Huff that could go into Independence and come away with a win.
Right.
I mean, sorry, I don't think there's a team other than Independence that could go into Huff and come away with a win.
Right. And then, it's going to be a slobber knocker.
Yeah, it's literally
And-
it's going
and
to come
I-
down to who has
it-
the ball last. I think.
Well, and turnovers too. I think it's one of those
Yeah.
turnover battles that whoever can win the turnover battle, you see what happens there. I look at another good. There were a couple good games we could have picked. Now I think about Catholic and Palisades.
Yeah.
Palisades didn't play tremendously well in the first round. You were at that game also.
Yeah, I mean the first half, nothing going, and I think that's what you're going to find when you get a new program. And you're under the bright lights in a big game for the first time.
Right.
And Page is nothing to to turn your nose up at.
Yeah, exactly.
They came to play. I think it took just Palisades a long time to get their footing under them and their rhythm together. A couple costly interceptions. The problem is when you play a team like Charlotte Catholic, the margin for error is very
It's slim.
small.
Right.
Very small, especially when you're at Catholic.
But a good part for them now, at least in terms of Palisades, is they've got one under their belt.
Yeah, that's
So
the
now-
hard. It's the hardest one
right,
to get.
And you're at home.
Yeah.
So you've got 4 quarters of playoff football under your belt. Now go have some fun.
Yeah.
And you like you said, it's a tough task to go into Catholic. That running attack, they just pound it and pound it. I've watched 3 or 4 games this year, and the first quarter went by in 8 minutes because
Yeah.
they did nothing but run the ball
Yeah.
the entire time and methodically just I don't want to say drive it down your throat, but that would say they're going to line up and play football, and that's what they do. So could Palisades get the upset? I don't know how much of an I guess it would 8, but it's an 8-9.
I mean, it definitely
So-
would be an upset, and we've seen them pull it off. Like with the early win over Cuthbertson early this season. I mean,
Right.
that was a huge win for them.
Right.
They had close games against Clover from South Carolina and against West Charlotte at the beginning of the season as well. And then, of course, that AK heartbreaking game. They could have probably even propelled themselves a little bit higher up with a win over AK. They might have
Right.
even been. I don't know if they would have been a seed above Catholic. This was probably the highest I think they could have been seeded. For where they were and the RPI that they played, but you definitely have a lot more confidence going into the game. And Catholic, it was more so. I mean, they were playing in a tough Porter Ridge team, so I
Yeah.
think Catholic got exactly the warm up they wanted.
I agree.
Palisades, I think, got the chance. At the end of the game, putting 2 touchdowns on the board. You take away that. You take away from that what you want to. So they're just gonna. But they're gonna. I mean, the margin of error is incredibly small when you go into Catholic. So that's gonna be where. The tough it's gonna
place
be tough.
to play.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then a team that, listen, I think could be one of the scarier teams left right now to me is Mallard Creek.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was on Twitter or something, Coach Tinsley's post game.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually, I think, brought up Martin Luther King Jr. About having a dream.
Yeah. I mean.
And I watched that post game kind of huddle. I was ready to run through a brick wall for him.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised they beat Lake Norman. No.
No.
But I think that team, they'd obviously have to face some more powerhouses, but it would not surprise me to see them go up to the mountains and beat Watauga.
No, I don't think so either. Watauga is an interesting team, and we saw, last year the early exit to Independence. Mallard Creek had an early exit as well in the postseason,
Right.
so that's something they want to rectify. But this year, outside of, the Huff game, I think was a punch in the mouth for Mallard Creek because
Right.
outside of that, they've handled pretty much everybody else. They beat West Charlotte this year.
Right.
They won the games that they wanted to out of state. They didn't get every out of state game they wanted to. The loss against Grayson, but they didn't get to play, Cardinal Gibbons, but they had, then they went on a tear, winning on the road at West Charlotte, beating North Mech. Their only loss was at Huff, and then,
Right.
Or after that was at Huff. Then you get,
And that was a beatdown.
yeah, but then you go, you get a win over West Mech, you get a win over Chambers, you get a win over Lake Norman. The thing is they haven't been on the road since that Huff game.
Right.
They've been at home for the last month.
And this is a road game.
And this is a road game with a team that's playing for a lot too. That's where I was.
Go ahead.
It's the back and forth, like you thought with Asheville. Maybe there's a reason why Asheville was a bit slower to get out of the gates because of everything they've had to deal with as a program,
Right.
a city, an area.
Right.
So does Watauga carry the same kind of curse, or is it is it more of a motivating factor for them?
I think it's motivation. I really do. I think for all the schools out there a little bit that, are still, out in the West and still recovering in the mountains. But I think for Watauga, it's a little, we had highlights of them on Friday night on the Blitz as they took care of Ragsdale. They looked good. They were having fun pulling out all the stops, and it's going to be tough. But like I said, Mallard Creek, that's the one team, the one coach I could see making a little more noise and not being done yet.
Yeah, it would not surprise me. But we talk about the private schools in Division II. Asheville school winning their state championship.
Yeah.
So great story for
Yep,
them. And
exactly.
Great. But that's where you get what kind of Watauga team is coming out of the gates?
Right.
What is their mindset like? And Mallard Creek is a tough team to beat, especially whether you're on the road or at home. It's hard to beat Mallard Creek. And so they had a good game, and they had a great not warm up game, but a first round against Lake Norman. That's a
Right.
tough team to play.
Yes.
In Coach Oliphant's team. So that is a big win for them. That was a big game, obviously, in our game of the week.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see again, how that's helped kind of carry the momentum into next week.
Yep. Another matchup. Another team near us that's going to be hosting Mooresville.
Yeah.
The 6th seed taking on Northwest Guilford.
I mean, they're just.
They're a machine.
Yeah, they run all over people. If you can't stop that offense, if you can't stop, their quarterback and their running back duo, then there's nothing you're going to be able to do.
Right.
And I see, and they're definitely coming, for revenge, after last year getting that early exit, losing to Mount Tabor.
Yep.
There in that second round. So
Right.
this is, where they got knocked out last year. And that was at home too. That was at Mooresville.
Right.
So, this is definitely a game that they're looking to kind of continue to, they're not gonna miss up that one. They're
Right.
not gonna drop that again if they have anything to say about it. And first year head coach and Zach Mayo has not, he's been with the program. They have not dropped off in the slightest. And so as long as they play their ball, they'll be good to go.
Yeah. No. Agreed.
And then you get the bottom of the bracket with Sun Valley, Weddington, and Marvin Ridge and Northern Guilford. Having both of them, still having 3 teams in that conference in the bracket.
Right. Yeah. No. Agreed. And you've still got a 26 seed, a 10 seed, and a 15 seed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what would be interesting is if Marvin Ridge could pull the upset.
Yeah.
And then play their neighbor straight down the street.
They would be going a very short road trip. I mean, the Weddington Sun Valley game. That's another one where you never count out any one of those teams. It's hard to not count out Weddington.
Well, like I said, I was at Weddington Friday night, and as they opened up against A.L. Brown, and
I mean they're just dominant.
It was 21-0 before you blink an eye.
Yeah.
In that defense, that defense on the sidelines.
Oh yeah.
As soon as A.L. Brown won the toss and decided to take the ball, they're on the sidelines going, mistake.
But you're screwed.
3 and out.
You're screwed if you do. You're screwed if you don't.
Right.
You give Weddington
Oh
the
no,
ball
I know.
first
Yeah,
and
you
let
get
them
right.
run down your throat, or do you?
Well, Weddington scored on their second play.
Yeah, so it doesn't really.
And before even blink an eye, it was 21-0 before you even blink an eye. So, Weddington, they want to get back. They want to defend that title, and I don't know. I guess Huff, Watauga. It'll be interesting to see who might stand in their way.
Yeah, who they'll have to host, because unless until they have to meet
Gremsley, right, in the state title.
They're gonna in the state semifinal, because they're in the 4A West, because they're both.
I'm
in the
sorry,
4A,
sorry, right.
So
you're right.
The state semifinal, they might have to go to Grimsley, and see who was the real number 1 in that seed. But I mean, look at Marvin Ridge played a great game. We talked about at the beginning of this, and to have that upset is huge for Marvin Ridge. They didn't get that, they got that last win, they lost to Sun Valley to the end of the year. They didn't get their into the playoffs win like they had.
Yeah.
And they had an early loss last year as well. They, beating, I believe it was beating AK their first game, and then losing, I believe it was to Mallard Creek in the second matchup. I could be wrong with that.
Right.
But I know they had an early exit as well. So, they're looking for, to try to move on past, and especially if they know that a game against Weddington at Weddington would be their next round. I'm sure they're more motivated to get to that
Game
point.
1.
But, of course, that means Weddington has to, finish up against Sun Valley first. Last year we thought nobody could beat Weddington except for Butler at the beginning of the year, but then Marvin Ridge pulls away a game where they weren't sitting their starters in that last game.
No.
They were trying to get, they were trying to get their best record and their best seed possible, and they still did get it, but even with the loss to Marvin Ridge. So
when you're those 1 and 2 seeds, the further this goes along, a little more pressure you have,
and to show you're not, to show you
you deserve to be there, and it's not like you deserve the seed you got.
Yeah,
I get it. 3A's
got some big matchups too.
Yeah, as we talk about 3A a little bit.
You look at West Charlotte hosting West Rowan. That'll be a big one. Crest having to go on the road is pretty huge.
Right.
Having to go on the road to Oak Grove is
to
a pretty
leave
big, leave that area.
To leave Crest, and have the crowd that they get.
Just with the way that it worked out. But I think 2 of the biggest matchups. Number 13, Kings Mountain, beating the state champions from a few years back in East Lincoln.
Right.
And then they're going to J.M. Robinson. That's going to be a huge game.
That's going to be, that's 2 teams that know how to get the job done, who've had tremendous years.
Yeah.
And I don't even know when we're going to go to that. That'll be one of the games that we cover on the Blitz.
And
so we're going to make the trip, but your thoughts on that?
It's just a war of differing philosophies. You have Kings Mountain, kind of the workhorse football
grind
team.
It out.
Yeah, put
lunch pail.
Yeah, put 3. Put your fingers in the dirt. And 3-point stance. Get at where J.M. Robinson, they can score any way they want.
Right.
Through the air. Over the ground. So it's kind of old school, new school. I think Kings Mountain has the defense to try to corral J.M. Robinson a bit, but when they have the players that they have.
It's the type of game where Kings Mountain's got to dominate on the offensive side of the ball in terms of possessions, time of having the ball.
Yeah, and J.M. Robinson.
Because JMU, that's my Virginia days. JMR, I'd love to know what they averaged. They put up 40, 50 a game.
Yeah,
most of the time.
They run through teams. They're high scoring. They're high profile. You saw even, and it's not the same as it was last year. Like Northwest Cabarrus last year in those last 2 games. In the first round of the playoffs and the last week of the game, week of the season.
Right.
James Robinson was a lower seed last year. Northwest Cabarrus was higher. But in those last 2 weeks back to back, they were closer football games.
Right.
when they played Northwest Cabarrus this year, it was not a closer football game. For as good as Northwest Cabarrus is, it was not a closer football game.
Right.
Jan Robinson a higher seed. Northwest Cabarrus not able to pull out a win either. So it's going to be, because Ashbrook got a big win over Northwest Cabarrus.
Right.
And we'll talk about them in a second. But that game is going to be probably your title 3A game in the area. And again, another one of those where, like, if Kings Mountain can contain, it could come down to who has the ball at.
It's sad that one of those two will drop out.
It is, and that's what you kind of like. Whether it's with the RPI, the bracket, and maybe that's what they're going to do. But that's what it kind of is going to be a glimpse as to what next year is going to look like, because these brackets are going to be smaller. The competition is going to be more severe. So you're going to lose half your teams each week, at least for our coverage DMA or like our area. But yeah, because like you look at look at 4A, you're going to lose Palisades Catholic, you're going to lose Indy or Huff, you're going to lose Sun Valley or Weddington. You're going to lose 3 big teams in the area. 3. You could potentially lose. You have, conference champ. You're going to lose a conference champion in Palisades or Catholic. You're going to lose a conference. You're going to lose a conference champion or a runner-up in Indy Huff. But yeah, you go down to it, and then even so, Ashbrook, South Point, and that's a huge game. Both conference, rivals. South Point's only loss this year was to Ashbrook.
Right.
So they're coming in hot, looking for revenge against Ashbrook.
Right.
But Ashbrook's been going on a tear.
Yeah.
They've been going on a tear with their games. Beating Northwest Cabarrus was a big kind of statement win for Ashbrook, because for the longest time around our area, it was Northwest Cabarrus and, J.M. Robinson. Those were the teams that came out the gate. Ashbrook had a big, they beat South Point. It was the win they really needed because, they lose to Crest early on in the year. And that doesn't really help them out. And then, they lose to Kings Mountain at Kings Mountain.
Right.
But they host South Point. Now they're going to have to go to South Point. But they've had 2 big wins the last few weeks in Hunter Huss and Northwest Cabarrus. So, they were hosting Northwest Cabarrus. Now they're going to have to go on the road to South Point. And South Point, since they lost to Ashbrook, hasn't lost a game. They didn't lose a game beforehand. They beat Crest.
Right.
With Crest coming to South Point. They beat, Lincolnton at the beginning of the year to start it off. So South Point's put together a pretty resume as well. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. That game is going to be one that's, I think, down in the final seconds as well. It's a 2 and a 15, but it is not
a 2. Right.
It is not the distance of a 2 and a 15.
Well, which now brings me to the 2A for just a second. When we talk about seedings or whatever, now you've got, as I look at the 2A, if I'm correct, I've got
you got Maiden
Shelby.
Yeah.
I mean, a 2 and
another one, a 2 and an 18, I believe was.
2 and 18.
So
that's not a 2 and 18.
It's so Maiden, like you talked about.
Go ahead.
Well, we talked about they beat Lincolnton for the first time. They lose on the road, mind you. 2 weeks ago, but prior they were at home and lost to Lincolnton. And that outside of like West Lincoln, Watauga, there are their only losses.
Right.
Same with Lincolnton went on a tear after losing early on in the season to Bunker Hill. Lincolnton started out the year 0-4.
Right.
And then went on a tear, beating pretty much their entire conference up, except for including Bunker Hill, who won that conference.
Right.
So
came away with a win.
And so Shelby's one of the hardest places to play, I think, in the state. Like, you look at when you get to these, like, we say Crest, we say Huff, we say, but like, Shelby Stadium is like a college stadium.
Well, I already say you're talking about 2 teams when we talk about playoffs are rich in history.
Yeah.
When it comes to playoffs, and it's 2 teams that the Queen City and the surrounding areas. When you say Maiden and you say Shelby, high school football immediately.
Yeah,
comes to mind.
But Maiden maybe gets a little bit of a boost. Their alumni and former coach, while he was on rest from he was on IR. Caleb Farley, just got signed on for a full contract, or just got signed on to the regular
Moved him
team.
up to 53. Yep.
So the Maiden alum maybe that gives his team a little bit of a boost. He was pretty happy about that. But so that, and he was coaching out there for a little bit.
Yeah, he did.
While he was injured.
I thought that was.
So that maybe gets, it's you don't want to count out Shelby. That would be obviously a huge upset if they would pull that off. But it's definitely not, like, 18 is not as far away as it sounds.
No, I agree.
For Shelby.
And I'm not sure. I don't know. A lot of these that I'm looking at in terms of, Burns has to go to Monroe.
Yeah, that's rough.
And face
14 and a 3.
Coach Johnny Sal on that team. The one game that I'm curious to see, though, and a school I'm curious to see how they continue to progress is CSD.
Yeah.
The Community School of Davidson. They've got to go to Mount Pleasant and take on the 7 seed.
Yeah.
But that's a team that, quietly has flown under the radar, got in the playoffs, and played well.
Well, they've had an interesting kind of, I wouldn't say up and down season. but you have a really tough schedule. You know, they lose to Country Day.
Right.
You know, they lose to Forest Hills at Forest Hills.
Right, which is,
A loss to Bishop McGinnis, who's in the playoffs as well. But then, you beat a team like Mountain Island Charter. You beat, and then, like, you lose to Corvian, though. Now, Corvian went on a tear this year. Undefeated. They have not been able to be stopped. And they get some big wins. So it'll be what CSD is coming,
which one shows up?
Yeah, and of course you have to go to Mount Pleasant. Now, we also talk about another one of these big matchups, big seed with a mid-range is looking back, or looking still at the 2A with Hickory and with Statesville. I mean, that's with Hickory being the 3 seed there and Statesville being the 14 seed, that's a big matchup as well.
Well, you're talking what? The defending state champion?
The reigning,
with Hickory?
Which is the crazy thing for me, too, about RPI is that, Hickory goes undefeated. They have big wins at the beginning of the year, with Newton Conover, Cox Mill. They beat up a 4A team. Now, if Cox Mill had won a bit more games, it might have been a bit more helpful. But actually, I'm sorry, I think that might be in the 3A, if I'm not mistaken.
Hickory?
Yeah, I can't remember which one of the other.
I think that is.
I can never remember. But then, they don't lose. I mean, they do not lose.
Right.
And so they just beat Statesville at the end of the year. So it's another conference matchup between the two teams. They just beat Statesville at the end of the year, hosting as well. So
Statesville
will have to come back to Hickory to try to pull out a win. But that could be a tough game because Statesville has put up some big games as well. Statesville has not shied away from big matchups. Beating, especially at the beginning of their season, beating Lake Norman on the road, beating South Iredell on the road. Beating East Lincoln at home. They've had some big wins in their bracket as well, so that could be a lot closer than a 3 and a 14 matchup.
And then, just real quick, a couple of the 1A matchups. I look at like North Rowan and East Wilkes.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
You've got, Christ the King making noise.
Yep.
Going up, they got to travel to go take on number 3 Murphy.
Yeah.
Then you mentioned, Corvian Community. 5 seed. They'll play host to Mitchell. South Stanley and Starmount, that's an 8 and 9.
Yeah.
And then, Mountain Island Charter, can they go into the number 1 seed, Mount Airy, and get the upset?
It was a really close game against Bishop McGinnis, and those two teams, go head-to-head in the same conference.
Right.
It was 18-17 again. These middle-of-the-road teams, I think that's what their mindset is when they're thinking about restructuring is that, you get – I think that it's tough because, like – if we go, I don't know how many teams are going to boil it down to, but say it's a 32-team, 4A bracket, not a 64 team.
Right, which it could very well be.
So then,
I think it will be.
So then you have 16 aside.
Yeah.
So then if you have 16 aside, you're looking at teams like, Indy not being in it.
That's mind-boggling.
You're looking at teams like Indy not being involved, like Norman not being involved, Porter Ridge not being involved. I mean,
Marvin Ridge, yeah.
Marvin Ridge not getting in. You look at all those teams that would be out with a smaller bracket. And now we don't know how that's going to affect, obviously, their, the conferences or what have you, or how it's going to look.
Right.
But, that's where you get teams that, these big teams, teams that won, like, it wasn't all chalk in the first round.
Right, no.
Now, it wasn't very, like I said, I think there was a few upsets, and those upsets came in the 17-18, I want to say, where a couple 18s beat some 17s.
Except for Marvin Ridge.
I'll say Marvin Ridge being the main, really big.
That's the one that stands out.
But I think that's where. So it'll be interesting to see how they want to structure the playoffs.
Right.
And then you still got, we want to look at South Carolina too. Northwestern had a bye.
Right.
Right in our area.
Yeah.
Well, they're undefeated. Rock Hill had a bye, so Northwestern's going to host Indian Land. That'll be a big game for that area. Rock Hill hosting River Bluff.
Yep. And how do you come out? I'm always. I don't know, man. It's always that. Would you rather have the rest and be ready to play? Or do you bring the momentum in from a win
and so I'm wondering,
and move on?
And so I'm wondering then if that's kind of the route that the NCHSAA might take is looking at – because South Carolina is up to – I think it's – they have a 5A Division I, a 5A Division II, then they have a 4AA, and then a 4A, and then they go down. So they have a technically like 6A class. So I wonder if that's how they're going to kind of reference it and go, we'll give Weddington a bye off the top. You'll get, Huff gets a bye off the top because these first-round matchups are pretty much just barn burners half the time.
Yeah.
I would love to look at the statistics of however long it's been since they've started a 64-team field because if I recall correctly, it was not that way when I was playing at Providence High School back in the day. I do not think it was a 64-team bracket.
I don't think so.
But however long they've done that for, I would like to see the statistics of has a 32-team ever, taken out a number one? Has it ever been close? Has a 31 ever beaten a 2? I think I would like to see those.
Virginia, UMBC.
Yeah, I would like to see those statistics as to what that would be. Outside of that, I think that it could be good for the area. I'm just interested to see how they, restructure the conferences. You know, a lot of these conferences are very. It's hard to keep. That's why you have Indy West Charlotte is more of a matchup, even though they're not in the same class or the same conference, but it's the proximity.
Right.
So these conferences are so young. Like Catholic had never won the conference before.
Right, yeah.
And which is crazy to say that a team like Catholic had never won the respective conference they were in, but they hadn't been in that conference that long.
Right. Not long at all.
So it'll be interesting to see how they restructure those conferences and how that will affect the playoffs going forward.
Yeah. All right. So, of course, we'll have a recap with the Blitz at 10:30 on WCCB on Friday night.
Yep.
We'll have all the second round action for you. Like I said, we're hitting a couple of the 3A schools.
Yep.
We'll have our game of the week.
Yep.
Huff and Indy. We'll get some video from Watauga,
Yep.
Mooresville maybe. So make sure you
Yep.
check us out
But
on all that.
I say more than just football too, though.
Yeah, more than football. We do have basketball. The high school hoops. I think you had a couple games last Tuesday night you went to.
The private schools were kicking off.
Yeah, the private schools were kicking off. And talking about a private school, so I had the chance to go out to Ambassador Christian, brand new school out in Huntersville. Their head coach is Scott Taylor, who, if you've been around Charlotte,
Yeah.
you've been around Myers Park,
Yeah.
you know his resume, you know his history. He was there for 8 years. Last year he was there, most wins in a season by any team at Myers Park on the hardwoods. Got the 4A state title. Makes the jump,
Yeah.
the leap of faith, and goes to Ambassador Christian. Brand new school, really didn't have a building a year ago when it was created. They had to kind of redo the gym. I had a chance to sit down, talk to him and a couple of his players. Right now they're 3-0.
Yeah.
And as we are recording this, tonight they are playing a school from California.
Wow.
That has flown from the West Coast over to the East Coast. This
That's
team is going to go
crazy.
to Ambassador Christian. They're going to another school just outside of Charlotte, and they're going to Georgia and South Carolina.
That's crazy.
Kind of crazy.
Yeah, you
But
kind of
anyway,
have to.
Yeah, I know. So I talked with Scott Taylor, a couple of his players, just about what it means to make that leap of faith and where they kind of stand. Take a look. For 8 years, Scott Taylor was the man in charge on the hardwoods at Myers Park. In his 8th and final year there, the Mustangs won the most regular season games in school history and won the 4A state title. Now Taylor is the man in charge at a brand new school that did not even exist a year ago or have a gym a few months ago.
Yeah, there was a gym here, but it didn't look like this, right? The structure was in place, but even then, the first meeting that I had with Coach Pogue, our athletic director, was up there in the cafe up at the front of the school, and everything else was under construction.
Including all the athletic programs. So Scott Taylor was given a clean slate to work with when it came to starting a basketball team.
It's a different opportunity to create a bigger, broader community, and that comes with a different feel. But that's no less special. It's no less significant. It's just unique.
And as the head coach of the Ambassador Christian Lions for a short period of time and just 2 games into their schedule, Scott Taylor has already had a huge impact on his players.
Coach Taylor has been big on leadership and just teaching us the right way to play the game.
Just establishing like a new strong culture that we can carry on for years with us and after us when we leave.
Yeah, it's been awesome just being able to play for a guy like Coach Taylor. He just wants us to come into practice every day and just give 100% and then just dial that into the game.
So great story, you know, and to make that leap of faith.
Yeah.
That's a leap of faith.
It is.
But the cool part is, and I asked him, I said, you know, you had a culture 8 years at Myers Park. Is the culture? Do you change it? You know, what can you bring from there to there? And he goes, you play basketball.
Yeah, as simple as that.
You go out and you teach the fundamentals, you teach the basics, and you go play. He was more excited about just being able to build a community.
Yeah, I bet.
Which is kind of cool. And so, yeah, basketball, we're in full tilt. You know, there are a couple of games on Tuesday night, which maybe we'll get out to. East Mex hosting Palisades. Indy, Hickory Ridge, Charlotte Catholic is taking on AK.
That's a big game.
And that's a good game there. So we'll hopefully get to some of those. Of course, make sure you stick with Bay Hackle Sports. We'll have scores, highlights for you as much as we can. Check out the Blitz. Continue to check out Game on the podcast here. Also, let me just real quick too. DJ Beal and his Keep Prowling podcast. We love being on that. Make sure you check out that podcast. A true Panthers fan, but love doing that with him. So make sure you check that out. But one quick thing though, and I just saw it, and it's not high school, but the football playoffs, college, Division II. How does Johnson C. Smith not get in? I just congrats to Wingate. They won the SAC. I think they're like the 2 seed.
I believe so.
And they host Virginia Union, who was in the CIAA championship this past weekend. I forgot who they played. It might have been Virginia State. Not quite sure. But JCSU beat both of those schools.
Yeah.
Was not in the CIAA championship, and there's a picture on social media of them in their room
It's got to be heartbreaking.
waiting to see if they'll get in and where they would be seated,
Yeah.
and they didn't get in. And I was just crushed for the Golden Bulls.
The storybook season that they put together to start, and it just kind of.
It gets back to that. Does it get back to that RP? Like
I don't know how
get
they
it,
even
man.
structured, but their last two losses to end out the season.
Yeah.
I mean, just
I know.
crushed them. And I do think it's a huge travesty to not have them in there. I think
agree.
it's still an issue of how the HBCU schools are weighted in
Right.
Division II playoffs and the CIAA itself.
I agree,
So,
and I know that basketball wise too. I've talked to a couple coaches just going that conference.
doesn't get
Nor does the HBCU period,
and
in terms of getting the respect they deserve.
and to where there've been requests or that's where the kind of the Celebration Bowl came about. That's
Right.
where kind of where they say, hey, let's let's have one for our
Right.
for Division II or have our own playoffs. And that's why they're bringing the basketball.
Right.
The-
I forgot the name of it. It's going to be the same weekend as kind of March Madness starts.
to say we don't
like
need to wait.
16 teams or something.
We don't need to wait for y'all. We'll have one on our own.
Right.
So
And kudos. Let him do it. Anyway, I just want to bring that
No,
up. because
it is-
It was kind of heartbreaking when I saw the social media.
absolutely is.
on that. All right, hey, listen, that is it for this episode of Game On. Thanks so much for tuning in. Of course, wherever you listen or watch your podcast, make sure you check us out, subscribe, like, comment. We'd love to hear from you. Jack, thanks, man.
Thank you.
We'll see you Friday night on the Blitz, and we'll see you guys next week. Thanks.